Coffee was still hot when my phone rang. I remember that clearly because I just sat down for the first time all morning. Retired, 63 years old, and somehow still couldn't manage to drink a cup of coffee while it was warm. I picked up on the second ring. It was my son-in-law, Gord. That's what I called him, Gord, even though his name was Gordon on paper. He'd been married to my daughter, Leanne, for 7 years. 7 years I'd watched him the way a father watches. Not with suspicion exactly, more like patience. "I need a favor," he said. "No hello, no how are you. Just that." He explained that he had a conference in Vancouver. 3 days, maybe 4. Something about a supplier contract that couldn't wait. His son, my grandson Theo, was 8 years old, and Leanne was visiting her sister in Fredericton. She wouldn't be back until the weekend. Could I take Theo? Of course I could take Theo. He was my grandson. I'd have driven through a blizzard for that boy. "Drop him off tomorrow morning," I said. "I'll have pancakes ready." Gord paused, a beat too long. "He's not a big breakfast eater," he said. "Don't worry about feeding him much." I thought that was an odd thing to say, but I let it go. Theo arrived at 7:15 the next morning. Gord pulled into my driveway in Guelph, the same house I'd lived in for 30 years, the one where Leanne grew up, and Theo climbed out of the back seat with a backpack that looked nearly as big as he was. He walked toward me slowly, not the way a kid runs to his grandfather. More like he was crossing a parking lot, careful, watching the ground. I crouched down to his level. "Hey buddy," I said, "good to see you." He looked up at me with those gray eyes of his, Leanne's eyes, and gave me a small smile. The kind of smile that's working hard to be there. Gord didn't come inside. He handed me Theo's bag from the car, said, "Thanks, Neil, that's my name, Neil," and was back behind the wheel in under 2 minutes. I watched him drive away. Theo stood beside me on the front step and watched too. Very still beside me on the front step and watched too. Very still, until the car turned the corner. "You hungry?" I asked. He nodded. I made pancakes. Blueberry, from scratch. The way my own father used to make them on Saturday mornings in Barrie. I set the plate in front of Theo at the kitchen table and turned back to the stove to pour myself a coffee. When I looked over my shoulder, he hadn't touched them. He was sitting very straight in the chair, hands flat on his thighs, staring at the plate like it might disappear. "Go ahead," I said. "They're for you." He looked up at me. "Am I allowed?" 3 words. I almost didn't catch him. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, and he'd said it so quietly, like he was checking a rule he didn't want to break. I set my coffee cup down, came and sat across from him. "Theo," I said, "you're always allowed to eat here. You don't need to ask." Something moved across his face. Not relief exactly, more like he was filing that information away, not quite sure yet if he believed it. He picked up his fork and ate. He ate everything on that plate and I gave him seconds and he ate those too, and the whole time neither of us said much. I watched him and tried to keep my face steady and calm, the way you learn to do when you know that something is wrong and you don't want to frighten the child. That first night I checked on him before I went to bed. He was asleep in the guest room, the one with the blue quilt that Leanne picked out years ago. He'd curled himself into the far corner of the mattress, pressed up against the wall, taking as little space as possible. His shoes were lined up perfectly beside the bed. His backpack was zipped and sitting by the door, like he was ready to leave at any moment. I stood in a doorway for a long time. I told myself I was reading too much into things. Kids are different. Some kids are quiet. Some kids are careful. I told myself that and went to bed and didn't sleep until almost 2 in the morning. The second day, we walked down to the park near Riverside Drive. It was October, cold enough for jackets, the leaves all red and orange and dropping fast. Theo walked beside me and I let him set the pace. We didn't talk much, but it was a comfortable quiet, or getting there. At the park, there were other kids his age, a couple of them kicking a soccer ball. I asked Theo if he wanted to join them. He watched them for a minute, and I could see him wanting to, the way his feet shifted. But he shook his head. "That's fine," I said. "We can just watch." We sat on a bench. After a while, one of the other kids missed a kick, and the ball rolled toward us. Theo jumped down, stopped it neatly with his foot, and kicked it back. The other kid grinned and waved. Theo sat back down beside me, but he was smiling now. A real one, the first real one I'd seen since he arrived. "You're good at that," I said. He shrugged. "Dad says soccer is a waste of time." "Your dad plays hockey," I said, remembering. "He played Junior B in Sudbury, I think." Theo nodded. He didn't say anything else. But something had shifted in the air between us. Something careful and slow, like ice starting to give way on the river in March. On the way home, I stopped at Tim Hortons. I asked him what he wanted, and he said whatever was fine, and I told him no, I wanted to know what he wanted. He thought about it very seriously and said a hot chocolate and a Boston cream. I got the same thing, and we sat at a table by the window and drank our hot chocolates and watched people on the street, and it was the closest thing to normal I'd seen from him yet. That night I made spaghetti. He had 2 full bowls. I watched him eat, and I thought about the pancakes again. Am I allowed? I thought about the way he pressed himself into the corner of the mattress. I thought about his backpack, always packed, always by the door. After dinner, he helped me wash up without being asked, stood at the sink and dried each dish carefully and stacked them the way I do, plates together, bowls together, not mixing anything up. He knew how to do that, which meant someone had taught him to do it exactly right. There are different ways to teach a child to be careful. The third morning, I found him in the kitchen before I was up. He was sitting at the table with his hands folded, not eating, not reading, not looking at his phone, just sitting, waiting. "Theo," I said, "what are you doing up?" "Waiting," he said. "For what?" He looked at his hands. "For you to say it's okay." I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down slowly. My knees aren't what they used to be. "Okay for what, buddy?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then to eat, to get food. Dad says we have to ask first. And if you don't ask." He didn't answer, but he pressed his lips together in a way that answered the question anyway. I kept my voice even. I had to. I'd spent 30 years as a supervisor at a manufacturing plant in Guelph, and I'd learned that you don't raise your voice when the situation calls for steadiness. But my hands, resting on the table, were pressed flat and very still. "Theo," I said, "you are allowed to go to my fridge any time you want. You are allowed to help yourself to anything in this house. You don't ask me first. You don't wait. Do you understand?" He looked at me like he was checking whether I meant it. Then he nodded. "Good," I said. "Now, eggs or cereal?" "Eggs," he said, a little faster than before. I called Leanne that afternoon while Theo was watching television in the other room. I moved to the back porch and kept my voice low. "Has Theo seemed different to you lately?" I asked. "Quieter?" There was a pause. "He's always been a quiet kid, Dad. He's like Gord." "Leon." I chose my words carefully. "He asked me if he was allowed to eat, both mornings." Another pause. Longer this time. "What do you mean, allowed?" He sat at my kitchen table and waited for me to tell him he could eat. "Both mornings." And this morning he told me that at home, he has to ask first. I heard her breathing. I heard her trying to figure out what to do with what I was saying. "Kids say weird things, Dad. You know how they are." He slept pressed against the wall with his bag packed by the door. Silence. "Leon, I'm here." Her voice was different now, smaller. "I'll talk to Gord." "I need you to come home," I said. "Not this weekend, now." She drove down from Fredericton the next morning. 9 hours. She walked through my front door with her coat still on and went straight to Theo and hugged him, and I watched her face over his shoulder, and I could see it, the thing a parent sees when they're finally looking for it, the way he went rigid when she first grabbed him. Just for a half second. Then he softened and hugged her back. But that half second. We talked after Theo was asleep. Leanne sat at my kitchen table in the same chair where Theo had waited to be allowed to eat, and I told her everything slowly and without judgment, the way I'd been trying to rehearse it in my head for 2 days. She cried, not dramatically, just quietly, with her hands flat on the table, very still the way Theo sat when he was waiting. She told me things had been hard. The restaurant Gord had invested in had failed. He'd lost close to $40,000, most of it borrowed against their line of credit. The debt had changed him. He was angry a lot. He had rules in the house. She thought they were just about being organized, about discipline. She didn't realize. "Has he hurt you?" I asked. "No," she said, "not me." The way she said "not me" told me everything I needed to know. She confronted Gord when he returned from Vancouver. I wasn't there for that conversation, but she called me that night, and her voice had hardened into something I recognized. She was done. Within a week, she'd taken Theo to a family resource center in town. A social worker there helped her file a report with Children's Aid Society of Wellington County. A CAS investigation was opened. A caseworker came to the house and spoke with Theo in a room by himself, and Theo, for the first time, told someone what had been happening. The missed meals as punishment. Being sent to his room without dinner 2-3 nights a week. Being told he was a burden. Being told the family couldn't afford him. At 8 years old, I read the words in the report later. Leanne showed me, and I had to put it down and walk outside and stand in my driveway in the cold for a long time before I could go back in. The CAS determined the conditions met the threshold for a protection finding. Gord was required to vacate the family home. He was permitted supervised visits only, conditional on enrolling in a parenting program and attending anger management counseling. The case went before the Ontario Court of Justice. His lawyer argued the financial stress, the business failure, the pressure he'd been under. The judge acknowledged those circumstances and found them entirely irrelevant to what had been done to a child in that house. Gord was ordered to pay child support under the federal child support guidelines, $1,240 a month based on his income. He was to have no unsupervised contact with Theo until a review hearing in 18 months. Leanne and Theo moved into the apartment above my garage. It wasn't forever, we both knew that, but it was right for now. I painted Theo's room blue, the same blue as the quilt in the guest room. He asked if he could put up a poster of the Maple Leafs, and I said, obviously. What kind of question was that? And he laughed, properly laughed, loud and a little ridiculous, and I had to turn away so he didn't see my face. What I've come to understand in the months since all of this happened is that there are things you miss when you're not looking. I was his grandfather. I'd seen him at Christmas, at Thanksgiving, at birthday parties. I'd handed him cake and played cards with him and driven him to hockey practice when Gord was busy. I thought I knew him. I didn't know he was going to bed hungry. That thought lives with me. It probably always will. The CAS worker, when we met, told me that schools are mandatory reporters in Ontario, that any teacher or staff member who has reasonable grounds to suspect a child is being harmed is legally required to report it to CAS directly. Theo's teacher had noticed he was distracted, had noted concerns in his file, but the report was never made. The worker told me this matter-of-factly, but I could see it bothered her. It bothered me. It still does. I don't tell this story to condemn anyone. Gord grew up in a hard house. His father was a man who used silence and hunger as instruments of control. And Gord learned from him the way children learn, not by being taught exactly, but by absorbing. He's in therapy now. He's doing the work, or so Leanne tells me, and she'd know better than I would. I want to believe people can change. I'm 63 years old and I've seen it happen. Not often, but it happens. What I know for certain is this. Theo's 9 now. He eats breakfast every morning without asking permission. He leaves his backpack by the back door, not packed and ready, but slung on its side with one strap hanging off, the way a kid's backpack is supposed to look. He plays soccer in the driveway after school, and he is, as it turns out, genuinely good at it. Last Saturday, he scored a hat trick in his community league game in Guelph, and he came running off the field and grabbed my arm and said, "Did you see that, Pop?" And yes, I saw it. I see all of it now. I am not looking away. The chain doesn't have to continue. That's what the CAS worker said to me, and I've turned it over in my mind many times since. The chain doesn't have to continue. Someone has to be the one to reach in and break it. I'm glad it was me. I'm glad it was a cup of coffee and a phone call, and a little boy sitting too still at a kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in October. I'm glad I noticed. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Theo sitting at my kitchen table, hands flat on his thighs, not touching the food in front of him, waiting for permission to eat. He was 8 years old, and he already understood, the way children understand things, they should never have to, that food could be taken away, that it was conditional, that he had to earn it. I think about cause and effect a lot these days, not in any grand or mystical sense, just the plain, ordinary truth that what we do to people shapes what they become. Gord wasn't born cruel. He grew up in a house where his own father used silence and hunger to keep him small. And he carried that into his own home without, I think, fully understanding what he was carrying. That doesn't excuse it. It explains it. And the difference between those two things matters enormously if you're trying to figure out how to make sure it stops. What I had to find through all of this was the steadiness to act on what I knew was right, even when it was going to cost me. Confronting your own child's marriage, setting off a legal process that disrupts every life in the family, including hers, that's not a small thing. There were mornings in those first weeks where I second-guessed myself. Wondered if I'd read it wrong. Wondered if I'd overstepped. What brought me back every time was the image of that boy sitting still and waiting and asking if he was allowed. No amount of second-guessing changes what that question meant. Doing right by people sometimes requires that kind of clear-eyed courage. Not heroic, nothing dramatic, just the willingness to see what's actually in front of you and refuse to look away from it. I'd spent 30 years managing people at a plant in Guelph, and the most important thing I learned in that time was that ignoring a problem never makes it smaller. It only gives it more time to grow roots. And then there's what I learned from Theo himself. That boy, at 8 years old, with everything that had been done to him, still wanted to kick a soccer ball with the kids at the park. Still smiled when he scored. Still showed up every morning and dried the dishes without being asked. There is a kind of quiet toughness in children that we don't give them enough credit for. Theo didn't collapse under what was happening to him. He adapted and waited and endured. And when someone finally told him he was safe, he believed it. Slowly, carefully, but he believed it. Slowly, carefully, but he believed it. I'm not a perfect grandfather. I missed things I shouldn't have missed for longer than I should have, but I caught it when it mattered and I did something about it, and that's the part I hold on to. The chain doesn't have to continue. That's still the truest thing I know about any of this. Whatever we've inherited, whatever our fathers did or didn't do, whatever we learned in the houses we grew up in, we are not required to pass it forward. We can choose differently. It takes honesty about what's actually happening. It takes the willingness to act, even when it's uncomfortable. And it takes enough faith in the people around you to believe they're worth protecting. Theo turned 9 in the spring. He had a birthday party in my backyard. He ate 2 pieces of cake without asking anyone. I don't think he even noticed he didn't ask. And that more than anything else told me we were going to be okay.